The rain hammers my farmhouse like machine gun fire, each drop a memory I can't dodge. I sit at my kitchen table, field stripping my Beretta M9 for the third time tonight. The familiar ritual keeps my hands busy while my mind wanders back to places it shouldn't go. 20 years. Christ, has it really been that long? October 2001. I was 38 then, 3 years deep into my contract and feeling pretty good about the transition from Army Special Forces to private sector work. Better pay, fewer regulations, and I got to pick my missions. Or so I thought. The call came on a Tuesday. Urgent, classified, report to Fort Bragg immediately. They wanted contractors with SF backgrounds only, which should have been my first red flag. When the military needs something done quietly, they usually handle it in-house. When they farm it out to guys like me, it means they want plausible deniability. I walked into that briefing room thinking I knew what I was getting into. 3 chairs, 2 already occupied. The first guy looked like he'd been carved from granite. Tall, red hair, pale skin marked with freckles and scars. His hands caught my attention right away. Burn marks, old ones, covering his fingers and palms like a roadmap of pain. "William Sims," he said, standing to shake hands. His grip was firm but careful, like he was used to people staring at the damage. Navy SEAL, EOD specialist. The second man was smaller, compact in the way snipers tend to be. Dark skin, quiet eyes that missed nothing, and nervous fingers that kept finding the silver cross hanging around his neck. "Roger Garza, Marine Corps," he said simply. "Scout sniper." I introduced myself and took the third chair. We sat there sizing each other up. 3 predators wondering what kind of prey required our particular skill sets. William had the confidence of someone who'd spent his career making bombs go away. Roger carried himself with that patient stillness you only see in long-range shooters. Both good men to have at your back. The door opened and Captain Wendy Mejia entered carrying a stack of sealed folders. Puerto Rican, maybe 5'6", with the kind of rigid military bearing that suggested she'd earned her rank the hard way. Her dark eyes swept over us like she was conducting an inspection. "Gentlemen," she said, setting the folders on the table but not opening them yet. "Thank you for responding so quickly. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Nothing leaves this room." She had our attention. In my experience, when officers start with classification warnings, you're either about to get very rich or very dead. 6 teenagers went missing 4 days ago in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky. Local search and rescue was called off after 48 hours. William leaned forward. Weather, clear skies, perfect conditions. Mejia's expression didn't change. The decision to halt civilian search efforts came from higher up the chain. That was red flag number 2. You don't abandon kids in the mountains unless you have a damn good reason. "What were they doing out there?" Roger asked, his accent carrying just a hint of El Paso. "Cave exploration. The area has an extensive limestone system, popular with spelunkers despite being technically off limits." She opened the first folder and spread out satellite photos. "These images were taken yesterday." I studied the pictures. Dense forest, typical Appalachian terrain, nothing obviously unusual. But then Mejia pointed to several bright spots scattered through the trees. "Heat signatures," she explained. "They don't match any known wildlife patterns in the region." The signatures were too large for deer, too scattered for a bear den, and they seemed to be moving in ways that made my skin crawl. Not random animal movement, but something almost purposeful. "Electromagnetic anomalies have been reported in the area," Mejia continued. "Compass readings are unreliable. Radio communications experienced significant interference. 2 search helicopters reported instrument failures and had to abort their missions." William's scarred fingers drummed against the table. "Ma'am, with respect, this sounds like a job for regular SAR teams with better equipment. Why are you calling in special operators?" It was the question we were all thinking. Missing teenagers, even in weird circumstances, didn't usually require the kind of firepower sitting in this room. Mejia closed the folder and looked at each of us in turn. Because this isn't the first time people have gone missing in that area, and because the last military team that went in didn't come back the same. The room went quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of helicopters on the flight line. Roger's hand found his cross again. "How many?" I asked. 7 soldiers in 1953, 2 survivors, both requiring permanent psychiatric care. She paused. The area has been under military observation ever since. 48 years of watching and waiting. Whatever was out there, it had been patient. "Your mission parameters are simple," Mejia said, opening the second folder. "Locate the missing teenagers and evacuate immediately. No extended reconnaissance. No investigation of anomalous phenomena. You go in, find them, and get out." She slid 3 sets of documents across the table. Standard operational contracts, except for the liability waivers. I'd never seen language like that before. Clauses about psychological evaluation requirements, extended medical monitoring, and something called anomalous exposure protocols. "What exactly aren't you telling us?" William asked, his blue eyes hard. "Everything else will be explained on site by Colonel Josephine Davidson. She has operational command and full authority over mission parameters." Roger looked up from his paperwork. "And if we say no, then you walk away with our thanks and a standard consultation fee. No questions asked, no black marks on your records." Mejia's voice was steady, but I caught something in her eyes. Relief, maybe, if we chose to walk. That should have been red flag number 3. When the military makes it easy to say no to a high-paying job, it's because they know what they're asking might kill you. I signed the papers anyway. So did William and Roger. Maybe it was professional pride, maybe curiosity, or maybe we were just too stupid to recognize a trap when we saw one. "Transport leaves in 2 hours, Mejia said, collecting our signed contracts. "Pack light, bring personal weapons and standard gear. Everything else will be provided on site." As we filed out of the briefing room, William caught my arm. "You ever hear of anything like this before?" I shook my head, but that wasn't entirely true. During my time in Afghanistan, I'd heard whispers from other SF teams about missions that didn't make it into official reports. Places where the rules seemed different, where good soldiers came back broken or didn't come back at all. "Probably just some kind of chemical leak," I told him. "Industrial accident, maybe a meth lab. Government wants it cleaned up quietly." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Chemical leaks didn't require the kind of psychological waivers we'd just signed. I cleaned the Beretta's barrel one more time, the familiar weight of the weapon grounding me in the present. Outside, the rain continues its assault on my windows, and I try not to think about how it sounds like whispers in a language that shouldn't exist. We should have walked away. All 3 of us should have taken that consultation fee and never looked back. But we didn't. And 2 hours later, we were on a helicopter heading toward the mountains, towards something that would destroy everything we thought we knew about the world. I reassemble the pistol with practiced efficiency, chamber around, and set it on the table beside me. 20 years later, and I still keep it loaded, just in case the whispers get too loud. The helicopter's rotors kicked up a cloud of dust and dead leaves as we touched down in what looked like a Boy Scout camp crossed with a military black site. I counted at least a dozen soldiers positioned around the perimeter, all carrying weapons I didn't recognize, not standard issue stuff. The forward operating base was temporary but professional. Communication arrays, medical tents, and a command vehicle that probably cost more than my house. Someone had money to burn on this operation, which meant someone important was very worried about 6 missing college kids. Colonel Josephine Davidson stood beside the command vehicle like she'd been waiting there for hours. Maybe she had. She was tall, maybe 5'9", with steel gray hair pulled back so tight it could have been painted on. Her uniform was crisp enough to cut glass, and when she looked at us, I felt like a recruit again. "Gentlemen," she said, dismissing the helicopter crew with a gesture. They lifted off immediately, no questions asked. That kind of instant obedience told me everything I needed to know about Davidson's authority level. She waited until the rotor noise faded before speaking again. "Welcome to Site 12. William shifted beside me. "Ma'am, our briefing mentioned missing teenagers. This looks like preparation for a small war." Davidson's expression didn't change. "Mr. Sims, what do you know about geological anomalies?" Enough to know that's not an answer. I liked William's directness, but Davidson wasn't the type to appreciate pushback. She opened a folder and spread out topographical maps on the vehicle's hood. "Site 12 has been under military observation since 1953, she said. "The cave system you'll be entering is approximately 3 miles through dense forest terrain. The teenagers breached our perimeter barriers 4 days ago despite warning signs and motion sensors." Roger leaned over the map, tracing the marked route with his finger. "What kind of barriers?" "The kind that should have kept them out." Davidson's voice carried an edge that made my skin crawl. In 1953, an Army survey team reported severe equipment malfunctions and psychological disturbances after entering the cave system. 7 soldiers went in. 2 came out. The math wasn't hard. The other 5? Listed as missing in action. The 2 survivors required permanent psychiatric care. She pointed to a red circle on the map. "Standard protocol requires immediate civilian removal from Site 12. That's your mission." William studied the topographical lines. "What kind of psychological disturbances?" "The kind that end military careers." Davidson closed the folder. "Your operational window is 6 hours from insertion. After that, the site will be permanently sealed." That got my attention. "Sealed how?" "That's not your concern." But it was my concern because I'd seen what military sealing operations looked like. Usually involved enough explosives to level a city block. Davidson led us to an equipment table where a sergeant was laying out gear. Modified radio sets with extra shielding, flare guns, and ammunition boxes marked with symbols I didn't recognize. "Steel core rounds," the sergeant explained, "penetrate better in confined spaces." Steel core rounds were for punching through armor, not rescuing college kids. I picked up one of the radios. It was 3 times heavier than standard field equipment, with additional components I couldn't identify. "Each of you gets an emergency beacon," Davidson continued, handing out devices that looked like oversized pagers. "Activation brings immediate extraction. No questions asked." Roger turned his beacon over in his hands. "What if we can't reach the surface?" "Then you better hope the steel core rounds work." A truck engine rumbled behind us. Davidson waved over a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. 50s, weathered skin, wearing clothes that had seen better decades. "Harold Barnes," Davidson said. "Your guide." Harold nodded without making eye contact. His hands shook slightly as he lit a cigarette, and I noticed he kept glancing toward the tree line like something might come charging out. "Harold knows the area better than anyone," Davidson said. "He'll get you to the cave entrance." "You been inside before?" William asked. Harold shook his head quickly. "No, sir. My granddaddy told me stories about that place. Said some areas of the mountain ain't meant for people." "Superstition," Davidson said, but her tone suggested she didn't entirely believe it. Harold dropped his cigarette and ground it under his boot. "Ma'am, with respect, my family's lived in these mountains for 5 generations. We know which places to avoid. And yet 6 teenagers found their way in." "Kids don't listen to old stories anymore." Davidson handed me a sealed envelope. "Final mission parameters. Open only if you encounter something outside normal operational scope." I tucked the envelope into my vest pocket, wondering what could be outside normal scope for 3 special operators with steel core ammunition. "Questions?" Davidson asked. I had about 100, but her expression suggested she wouldn't answer any of them. William and Roger looked equally frustrated. Rules of engagement? William asked. Protect yourselves and complete the mission, in that order. Roger touched his cross. What about the teenagers, if they're injured? Bring them out if possible, if not. Davidson shrugged. 6 hours, gentlemen. Harold's truck is fueled and ready. As we loaded our gear, I caught Harold staring at the mountains with an expression I'd seen before. In Afghanistan, right before ambushes. The look of someone who knows he's walking into hell but can't figure out how to avoid it. You sure about this? I asked him quietly. Harold lit another cigarette with shaking hands. No, sir, I ain't sure about nothing. But those kids are up there, and somebody's got to try. Davidson appeared beside us. Mr. Castro, a word. She led me away from the others, stopping near the communication array where the radio chatter was loudest. Your psychological evaluation shows exceptional stress tolerance, she said. That's why you're team leader. What aren't you telling us? Everything that matters. She looked toward the mountains. Site 12 isn't like other places. The rules are different there. Trust your training, but more importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And if we find something we can't handle? Davidson's smile was colder than the mountain air. Then you'll understand why we brought the steel core rounds. Harold started his truck, the engine coughing like an old man with lung problems. William and Roger climbed into the bed with our gear, checking weapons one final time. I looked back at Davidson, who was already walking toward the command vehicle. 6 hours, she called over her shoulder. After that, you're on your own. The truck lurched forward, carrying us toward the tree line and whatever was waiting in Site 12. Harold drove like he was heading to his own funeral. And maybe he was. Maybe we all were. Harold's hand shook as he lit his third cigarette in 20 minutes. We'd been hiking for 2 hours through forest that felt wrong in ways I couldn't put my finger on. The trees grew too close together, their branches twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. No deer trails, no bird songs, just the kind of heavy silence that makes your ears ring. You boys sure about this? Harold asked for the 5th time, stopping to catch his breath on a steep section of trail. I checked my compass again. The needle spun like a broken toy, pointing everywhere and nowhere. Equipment malfunction, I muttered, though I knew better. Our radios had been producing nothing but static for the last hour, even though we were well within range of the base. William wiped sweat from his forehead despite the growing chill. Harold, how long have locals been avoiding this area? Long as anyone can remember. Harold took a nervous drag from his cigarette. My granddaddy used to tell stories about folks who got too curious about the mountain. Some came back talking nonsense, seeing things that weren't there. Others just never came back at all. Roger had been quiet for most of the hike, but now he spoke up. What kind of stories? Harold's eyes darted toward the tree line. The kind that keep children from wandering off. Said there was something up here that didn't belong. Something that called to people in their dreams. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Dreams? Yeah. Folks would start having the same nightmare over and over about caves and darkness and voices speaking words that made their heads hurt just thinking about them. Harold dropped his cigarette and ground it under his boot. Of course, that was just old mountain talk, probably. The way he said probably suggested he wasn't convinced. We climbed higher, the trail becoming less defined with each step. The trees pressed closer, their branches forming a canopy so thick that noon felt like twilight. My skin crawled with the sensation of being watched, though every time I turned around, I saw nothing but empty forest. Wildlife stays away too, Harold continued, his voice barely above a whisper. No deer sign, no squirrel nests, nothing. Even the insects don't like it up here. He was right. I'd been unconsciously listening for the normal sounds of forest life and hearing nothing. The silence felt thick, almost solid, like something you could reach out and touch. Roger's hand found his cross again. I'd noticed him doing that more frequently as we climbed. "Harold, you ever been inside the cave?" "Hell no." Harold's response was immediate and emphatic. "My granddaddy made me promise never to go near that place. Said some promises are more important than curiosity." William adjusted his pack, the steel core ammunition rattling softly. "But you know where it is?" "Unfortunately." We reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley carved between two peaks. Harold stopped and pointed with a trembling finger toward the mountainside opposite us. At first I didn't see anything unusual, just rock face and scrub vegetation. Then my eyes adjusted, and I spotted it. A dark opening in the stone, partially hidden by overgrown bushes and hanging vines. "There," Harold said. "That's your cave." Even from a distance, the entrance looked wrong. Too perfectly round, too dark, like it absorbed light instead of simply blocking it. Faded military warning signs were visible around the perimeter, along with sections of rusted chain-link fencing that had been cut through in several places. "Those signs been there since the 50s, Harold said. "Fence went up after the university incident." "University incident?" I asked. Harold lit another cigarette with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 3 years ago, 2 researchers from UK came up here with all kinds of equipment. Said they were studying geological formations. Local sheriff tried to turn them back, but they had permits from the state. William studied the cave entrance through his binoculars. "What happened?" "Only one came back. Girl named Sarah something. Found her 3 days later, wandering the highway in her underwear, talking about mathematics that made God cry." Harold's voice dropped to barely audible. "Spent 6 months in psychiatric care before she hung herself with her bed sheets." Roger's grip on his cross tightened. "And the other researcher?" "Never found him. Search teams went in about 50 feet before their equipment started failing. Compasses spinning, radios dead, flashlights dimming for no reason." Harold took a long drag. "They called it off after one of the searchers started screaming about voices in the walls." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The mission briefing hadn't mentioned any of this. Either Davidson didn't know or she deliberately left it out. "Harold," William said, lowering his binoculars, "I think you should wait here. Be our pickup point when we come back out." "I ain't going nowhere near that thing," Harold agreed quickly. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. "Drew you a map of what I know about the entrance. My granddaddy explored the first chamber back in the 30s, before he knew better." I took the hand-drawn map. Harold's grandfather had sketched the cave mouth and what looked like a large chamber about 100 feet inside. Beyond that, the map showed only question marks and the words, "Don't go deeper," written in faded pencil. "How far back did your grandfather go?" I asked. "Far enough to know he should turn around." Harold's cigarette trembled between his lips. Said the cave felt hungry, like it was waiting for something. Roger had started praying quietly, his lips moving in silent Spanish. The sound of whispered prayers mixed with the unnatural silence of the forest made my skin crawl. I shouldered my pack and checked my weapon one final time. "We'll be back in 6 hours if we're not." "I'll wait until dark," Harold said. "After that, I'm heading back to tell Davidson you boys are on your own." We started down into the valley, leaving Harold on the ridge with his cigarettes and his fear. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the mountain itself was trying to push us back. The air grew colder as we descended, even though it was warm October weather, and we should have been getting warmer as we lost elevation. William walked beside me, his scarred hands checking and rechecking his equipment. "You feel that?" "Feel what?" "Like something's pulling at the back of my mind, trying to get me to look at things that aren't there." I felt it too, a strange tugging sensation, like someone was trying to turn my head toward shadows that moved when they shouldn't. Stay focused on the mission. Roger caught up to us, his face pale. I keep wanting to turn around. Not because I'm scared, but because something's telling me I should, like a voice in my head that isn't mine. The cave entrance loomed larger as we approached. Up close, it was even more unsettling. The opening was perfectly circular, about 8 feet in diameter, carved into the rock with mathematical precision that nature doesn't usually achieve. The darkness inside seemed absolute, swallowing our flashlight beams like a hungry mouth. Rusted warning signs hung from the cut fence. Danger. Authorized personnel only, and geological hazard. Do not enter. Someone had spray-painted additional warnings in red. Stay out, and they're still in there. William ran his hand along the cave's edge. This isn't natural formation. Someone or something carved this. The stone was smooth as glass, with tool marks that followed no pattern I recognized. Stranger still, the rock felt warm to the touch, despite the cold air flowing from the cave's depths. I activated my radio, hoping for one last check with bass. Nothing but static filled with sounds that might have been voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. "Comms are dead," I announced. "We're on our own until we get back to Harold." Roger blessed himself and stepped toward the entrance. 6 teenagers went in here, if they're still alive. "Then we find them and get out fast," I finished. But as I stared into that perfect circle of darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something's mouth, something that had been waiting patiently for 20 years to finish what it started with those 7 soldiers in 1953. I clicked on my tactical light and stepped into Site 12. The darkness swallowed us whole. I swept my tactical light across the cave entrance and immediately knew we were too late. 6 sleeping bags lay scattered around a makeshift camp, along with backpacks sporting University of Kentucky logos and the kind of expensive outdoor gear that screamed trust fund kids playing at adventure. "They were definitely here," William said, kneeling beside a portable radio that was somehow still running. He turned the volume dial, but all we got was white noise mixed with sounds that might have been voices if you listened wrong. Roger hung back near the entrance, his hand finding that cross again. "How long you think they've been gone?" I checked one of the sleeping bags, still damp from body heat, maybe 12 hours old. "Not long enough." William picked up a spiral notebook from beside the radio. "Ashley Strickland," he read from the cover, then flipped through pages covered in neat handwriting. His expression darkened as he read. "What's it say?" "Started normal. Excited about exploring the forbidden cave. Typical college rebellion stuff." William's voice got quieter as he continued reading. "Then it gets weird. She writes about hearing sounds that don't match anything they can identify. Shadows moving when no one's walking around. I felt that cold sensation in my gut again." "When's the last entry?" William flipped to the final page. 2 days ago. Just says, going deeper to find Timothy." Roger made a sound like he'd been punched. "They split up." "Looks like it." I shouldered my pack and clicked my light toward the back of the cave. We followed the trail. The cave entrance had looked natural from outside, but 20 feet in, everything changed. The rough limestone walls gave way to something smooth as glass, with veins of mineral I didn't recognize running through the rock like frozen lightning. The veins pulsed in our flashlight beams, not quite glowing, but definitely reacting to the light. "That's not normal," William muttered, running his scarred hand along the wall. It wasn't. The surface felt warm, almost organic, like touching skin instead of stone. Worse, there were marks carved into the rock. Geometric patterns that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on them. Roger stopped walking. "Those symbols are moving." I looked where he was pointing. The carved patterns seemed to shift and writhe in my peripheral vision, but when I stared directly at them, they stayed still. "It's the light playing tricks." "No." Roger's voice was tight. "They're definitely moving." He bent over and threw up, the sound echoing through the tunnel. When he straightened, his face was pale and sweaty. "You okay?" "Something's pushing at the back of my head, like someone trying to get in." Roger wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. "Those symbols hurt to look at." I felt it too, a pressure behind my eyes like the beginning of a migraine. The carved patterns seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I had to fight the urge to trace them with my finger. "Stay focused," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to Roger or myself. We found Timothy Weaver's backpack 50 feet deeper, torn apart like something with claws had gone through it. Clothes and camping gear were scattered across the cave floor, along with a driver's license that confirmed the name. William knelt beside dark spots on the ground. Blood, still tacky. The droplets led deeper into the cave system, where the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. The symbols covered every surface now, carved so deep they looked like they'd been burned into the rock. My tactical light picked up 3 passages branching off from the main chamber. "Equipment check," I ordered, though I could already see William frowning at his night vision scope. "Something's wrong with the optics," he said, pulling the scope away from his eye. "I'm seeing things that aren't there, shapes moving in the darkness." "What kind of shapes?" William's scarred hands shook as he adjusted the scope settings. "I don't know. They don't look right, like they're twisted into angles that shouldn't exist." Roger had backed against the chamber wall as far from the symbols as he could get. "We should go back. This place feels wrong." He was right, but 6 kids were somewhere in this mountain, and we had a job to do. I followed the blood trail with my flashlight beam. The droplets led toward the central passage, which sloped down at a steep angle. Flashlights only from here on, I decided. No electronic optics. William clipped his night vision to his belt. "You think the equipment failure is connected to what happened in 1953? I think we don't have enough information to make assumptions, but I was starting to understand why Davidson had given us steel core ammunition for a rescue mission." The central tunnel went down fast, the walls pressing closer together as we descended. The symbols grew more numerous, covering every inch of rock surface. Some were carved shallow, others cut so deep they looked like wounds in the stone. Roger stumbled behind us, one hand on the wall for balance, the other clutching his cross. "They're getting louder." "What's getting louder?" "The voices, in the symbols." His voice was barely a whisper. "They're trying to tell me something, but the words make my head hurt." I couldn't hear voices, but the pressure behind my eyes was getting stronger. Each symbol seemed to pull at my attention, trying to make me stop and study the patterns. I forced myself to keep moving, following the blood trail deeper into whatever Site 12 really was. The tunnel curved sharply to the right, and my light caught something that made me stop cold. The walls ahead weren't limestone anymore. They were something else entirely, smooth and dark, with a surface that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. William bumped into me from behind. "Why'd we stop?" I played my light across the alien material. "Because I don't think we're in a cave anymore." The tunnel opened into a massive domed chamber that defied every law of geology I'd ever learned. I swept my flashlight across walls that curved up into darkness, estimating 60 feet to the ceiling. The space was perfectly round, carved with mathematical precision that made the entrance look crude by comparison. "Jesus Christ," William whispered behind me. The symbols covered every inch of the chamber walls, thousands of them arranged in spiraling patterns that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly. But these weren't carved like the ones in the tunnel. These glowed with a faint phosphorescent light that made my skull feel like it was splitting open. At the center of the chamber stood something that shouldn't exist, 20 feet tall, rising from the floor like a monument to alien mathematics. The surface looked like black stone shot through with veins of silver, but it moved. Liquid ripples flowed across its surface while the structure itself remained perfectly solid. The thing pulsed with the same rhythm as my heartbeat, and I realized with sick certainty that it was matching my pulse, not the other way around. "Casey." Roger's voice was barely audible. "Look at the base." 5 bodies lay arranged in a perfect circle around the structure. College kids, based on their clothes and gear. I approached the nearest one, a girl with dark hair wearing a UK sweatshirt. Her student ID read Marie Ramos, sophomore, biology major. I pressed 2 fingers to her neck. No pulse, but her skin was still warm. Body temperature suggested she'd died recently, maybe hours ago. No visible injuries, no blood, nothing to explain why a healthy 20-year-old was dead on a cave floor. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing with an expression of absolute terror frozen on her face. "Same with this one," William called from across the circle. He was kneeling beside a boy in hiking boots. "Timothy Weaver. Warm body, no obvious cause of death." I checked the other 3. Ashley Strickland, the girl whose notebook we'd found. Marcus Chen, David Rodriguez. All the same. Recently dead, no injuries, faces locked in expressions of pure horror. "What the hell killed them?" William asked. Before I could answer, he started walking toward the structure. "William, don't..." He got within 10 feet before an invisible force slammed him backward into the chamber wall. The impact should have knocked him unconscious, but instead he screamed, grabbing his head with both hands. "The cities are burning," he babbled, his scarred fingers clawing at his temples. "The sky is full of them, twisting through the darkness, and they're coming here. They're already here." Roger rushed to help him, grabbing William's shoulders. The moment they made contact, Roger dropped like he'd been electrocuted, blood streaming from his nose. "Things crawling under my skin," Roger whispered, scratching at his arms until he drew blood. "They're inside the walls, inside the mountain, inside my head." The pressure behind my eyes spiked into agony. Images forced themselves into my consciousness. Vast spaces between stars filled with living darkness. Beings of impossible geometry watching Earth through cracks in reality. I saw the cave's true history, and it wasn't built or carved. It had grown. Like a tumor in the fabric of space itself, a place where something else pressed against our world. The structure pulsed faster, its surface rippling with increased activity. The symbols on the walls began glowing brighter, and I understood with crystalline horror that our presence wasn't just activating it. We were turning it on. The air turned thick as soup. Each breath felt like drowning in reverse, my lungs working overtime just to pull in enough oxygen to stay conscious. The chamber walls seemed to be moving inward, though when I looked directly at them, they stayed put. William had gone completely still. Not relaxed still. Statue still. His eyes locked on the monolith like he was watching the most fascinating movie ever made. I grabbed his shoulder, and he didn't even flinch. "William, we need to move." He opened his mouth and started talking in that same flat voice, like someone reading a grocery list. "Coordinates 37.4 degrees north, 82.7 west. Differential equation delta x over delta t equals negative 4.7. The probability matrix indicates 73% convergence within..." "What the hell are you talking about?" More numbers poured out of him. Math problems that made my skull feel like it was cracking open. Coordinates to places I'd never heard of. William had barely passed high school algebra, but now he was spouting calculus like a college professor. Roger had curled up on the cave floor near Ashley Strickland's body, scratching at his arms until blood ran down to his elbows. "They're under my skin," he whispered, digging his fingernails deeper. "Crawling around, making little tunnels, getting ready to come out." I tried to stay focused, but my own thoughts were getting slippery. Images kept flashing through my head that weren't mine. Vast, empty spaces between stars. Things with too many angles watching Earth through cracks in reality. I saw Site 12's real history, and it wasn't a cave at all. It was a wound, a place where something else had pressed against our world until the barrier wore thin enough to break through. The teenagers hadn't gotten lost exploring. They'd been called here, pulled by dreams the monolith sent out like fishing lines. Their minds were supposed to be empty now, scooped out clean to make room for whatever was trying to push through from the other side. I fumbled for my emergency beacon and hit the activation button. The little red light blinked once, then died. Even if it had worked, I doubted help could get here in time. The monolith's pulsing grew stronger, matching my heartbeat so perfectly I couldn't tell which was which anymore. The chamber filled with something that wasn't quite sound, a vibration that rattled my bones and made my teeth ache. William started walking toward the monolith again. Not walking, gliding. His feet moved, but his body stayed perfectly upright, like someone was pulling him forward with invisible strings. His scarred hands hung loose at his sides, and that flat voice kept pouring out coordinates and equations. I tackled him from behind, wrapping my arms around his chest. It was like trying to wrestle a freight train. William had always been strong, but now he felt 3 times heavier, his muscles hard as steel cables. He didn't fight back, just kept moving forward while I hung on his back like a backpack. The convergence point requires biological anchors, he said in that horrible, empty voice. Neural pathways must be cleared for optimal data transfer. Roger started laughing, high-pitched giggles that echoed off the chamber walls like breaking glass. He was pointing at the shadows between the dead teenagers, shadows that moved independently of our flashlight beams. "Look at them dance," Roger giggled, blood still streaming from his nose. "They're so happy we came to visit. They've been waiting so long for new friends." The dead kids' eyes had started tracking something drifting through the chamber. 5 corpses following invisible movement with perfect synchronization, their heads turning in unison like they were watching a tennis match. I knew we had minutes left, maybe less. The monolith's surface rippled faster, silver veins pulsing with light that hurt to look at directly. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, rearranging themselves into new patterns that made my vision blur. William broke free of my grip without effort, his body moving with mechanical precision toward the structure. I grabbed his ankle, and he dragged me across the cave floor like I weighed nothing. "William, fight it." He looked down at me with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. "Fighting is inefficient. Acceptance reduces psychological trauma during the transition process." Roger had stopped laughing. He was sitting up now, perfectly straight, his head tilted at an angle that should have snapped his neck. When he smiled, his teeth looked too sharp. "Casey," he said in a voice that sounded like Roger but felt wrong, "you should let go now. The mathematics are already complete." I hauled Roger to his feet, his body limp as a rag doll. His eyes had rolled back, showing only white, and drool ran down his chin. Whatever had been talking through him was gone, leaving behind an empty shell. "We're leaving, now." William spun around, his face twisted with desperate hunger. "No, we can't. Don't you understand what we found? The knowledge, the mathematics. It's beautiful, Casey. It's showing us how everything works." I grabbed his arm and he yanked away with inhuman strength. The veins in his neck stood out like cables, pulsing with that same silver light from the monolith. "Look at your hands, William." He glanced down. His scarred fingers were moving on their own, tracing symbols in the air, complex geometric patterns that made my vision blur just watching them. "This is what it does," I said. "This is what happened to the teenagers." For a second, something human flickered behind his eyes. Fear. Recognition. Then the silver light pulsed brighter and he shook his head. "The convergence requires completion. The barriers are weakening. We have to help them through." I hit him with my rifle butt, right across the temple. He dropped like a stone, Roger's dead weight over my shoulder, William's unconscious body under my other arm. I staggered toward the tunnel entrance, my legs shaking from the strain. Behind us, the chamber erupted with light so bright it burned through my closed eyelids. The tunnel walls started moving, not cracking or shifting like normal cave-ins, moving, rippling like water, the stone flowing into new shapes. Symbols rearranged themselves as I watched, crawling across the surface like living things. Passages opened where solid rock had been seconds before. Others sealed shut with wet, organic sounds. Whispers filled the air. Not Roger's voice this time, but dozens of them speaking in harmonies that human throats couldn't produce. They offered me things, knowledge of the universe's hidden structure, the mathematics that governed reality, the locations of the other sites where barriers grew thin. All I had to do was stop running, turn around, accept what they wanted to give me. I kept moving. Roger suddenly convulsed and screamed, a sound like tearing metal. His body went rigid, then he broke free of my grip and sprinted ahead into the darkness. "Roger, wait." I couldn't chase him while supporting William's weight. The tunnel curved sharply left, then right, configurations that hadn't existed on our way in. I followed scratches Roger's fingernails had left on the walls, deep gouges in stone that should have been impossible to make. The mountain groaned around us, a sound like the earth's bones breaking. William's eyes snapped open. He looked around, confused, then started crying. "Casey, what did we do? What did we let in? Can you run?" He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I helped him to his feet and we stumbled forward together. Behind us, rocks began falling from the ceiling. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, promising answers to questions I'd never thought to ask. William kept looking back over his shoulder. It's still there, in my head, showing me things. Cities burning, the sky full of, "Don't look back, don't listen." We reached a tunnel intersection I didn't remember from before. 3 passages branched off in different directions. Roger stood in the center, perfectly motionless. "Roger," I approached slowly. When he turned around, his eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, the entire eye like someone had filled them with ink. He smiled with too many teeth and said something in that alien language, the words making my skull feel like it was splitting. Then he laughed and sprinted down the left passage. The tunnel collapsed behind him immediately, sealing shut with a sound like breaking bones. William grabbed my arm. "The ceiling's coming down." Chunks of limestone crashed around us. I picked the middle passage and ran, William right behind me. The walls continued rippling, symbols flowing like water, rearranging into patterns that hurt to see. A massive rumbling shook the entire mountain. Not just our tunnel, the whole structure was coming apart. "There!" William pointed ahead. A circle of gray light, the entrance. We ran toward it as the cave system collapsed behind us, passages folding in on themselves like origami made of stone. We burst out of the cave mouth and kept running, not stopping until we reached the ridge where Harold had waited. His truck sat empty, driver door hanging open. Harold lay in the clearing 20 feet away, his face frozen in the same expression of absolute terror we'd seen on the teenagers. No injuries, no blood, just pure horror, locked in place forever. William collapsed beside me, gasping. Roger's still down there. I looked back at the mountainside. The cave entrance had vanished, sealed behind tons of collapsed rock. If Roger was still alive, he was trapped with whatever we'd awakened. In the distance, helicopter rotors chopped through the afternoon air. Our ride home was coming. I just wasn't sure we deserved to take it. I stumbled out of the cave mouth, dragging William behind me. After hours in that alien darkness, normal sunlight looked wrong somehow. Too yellow, too warm, like it was trying too hard to be reassuring. William kept pulling against my grip, trying to turn back toward the collapsed entrance. "We have to go back. Roger's still down there. We can't just leave him. There's nothing left to go back to." The entire mountainside was sinking. Sections of forest tilted at impossible angles as underground chambers caved in. Trees that had stood for decades toppled into sinkholes that opened like hungry mouths. The mountain groaned like a dying animal, a sound that came up through the soles of my boots. William broke free and took 3 steps toward the destruction before I tackled him. He fought me with desperate strength, clawing at the ground, trying to crawl back toward Site 12. "The equations aren't finished," he gasped. "I can still see them, Casey. They're beautiful. They explain everything." I hauled him to his feet and slapped him hard across the face. His eyes focused on me for a second, confused and afraid. "William, look at your hands." He glanced down. His fingers were moving on their own, tracing those same geometric patterns in the air. When he realized what he was doing, he shoved his hands into his pockets and started shaking. What did it do to us? I didn't have an answer. The pressure behind my eyes had faded but not disappeared. Images still flashed through my mind. Vast spaces between stars, things with too many angles watching our world through cracks in reality. I could feel the knowledge sitting in my brain like a tumor, growing larger every time I tried not to think about it. We reached the ridge where Harold had been waiting. His truck sat in the clearing, driver door hanging open like he'd jumped out in a hurry. I called his name, but got no response. Harold lay 20 feet from the truck, flat on his back, staring at the sky. His face was frozen in that same expression of absolute terror we'd seen on the teenagers. Eyes wide open, mouth stretched in a silent scream, every muscle locked in place. I knelt beside him and checked for a pulse. Nothing. His skin was already cooling, but there were no injuries, no blood, no sign of what had killed him. Just pure horror, preserved forever on his weathered features. "Jesus," William whispered. "What happened to him?" "Same thing that happened to the kids." William backed away from the body, but he never went in the cave. He was up here the whole time. I looked back at the mountainside. The cave entrance had vanished completely, sealed behind tons of collapsed rock. If Roger was still alive down there, he was trapped with whatever we'd awakened. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the afternoon air. Our ride home was coming. My radio crackled to life, Colonel Davidson's voice cutting through the static. "Team leader, report status. We show seismic activity at your location." I stared at Harold's body, at William's shaking hands, at the destroyed mountainside where Roger had disappeared. How do you explain something that shouldn't exist? "Mission complete," I said into the radio. "Requesting immediate extraction." "Copy that. Bird is inbound. ETA 3 minutes. What's the status on the civilians?" William was drawing symbols on his forearms with his fingernails, scratching deep enough to draw blood. He didn't seem to notice he was doing it. "Negative on civilian recovery," I said. "Site is compromised. Recommend permanent closure." "Understood. Prepare for extraction." The helicopter appeared over the ridge. A black military transport that looked like salvation and damnation rolled into one. As it settled into the clearing, the rotor wash scattered leaves around Harold's body. 2 medics jumped out with a stretcher. They took one look at William, still scratching symbols into his skin, eyes tracking invisible movements through the air, and loaded him up immediately. One of them tried to sedate him, but William's eyes stayed open, staring at something only he could see. I climbed into the helicopter and strapped myself in. As we lifted off, I watched the mountainside shrink below us. Smoke rose from the collapsed sections, and I could see military vehicles already moving in to secure the area. William was mumbling under his breath, a steady stream of coordinates and equations that made my skull ache. The medic monitoring him looked concerned. "How long has he been like this?" "Since we came out of the cave." The medic made notes on his clipboard. "We'll get him stabilized at the base. Probably just shock from whatever happened down there." I didn't correct him. There was no point explaining that William wasn't in shock. He was infected. We all were. The only question was how long it would take to spread. The helicopter banked toward the base, carrying us away from Site 12. But I could still feel it pulling at the back of my mind, like a fishhook lodged in my brain. The knowledge it had forced into my head pulsed with each heartbeat, showing me glimpses of other places, other caves, other barriers wearing thin. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about Roger, alone in the darkness with whatever we'd awakened. Tried not to wonder if he was still human, or if something else was wearing his face now. The helicopter's engines drowned out William's mumbling, but I could still see his lips moving, forming words in that alien language that made reality bend around the edges. We were going home, but I had the sick feeling that home would never be the same. I set down my coffee mug and stared at the newspaper spread across my kitchen table. Another missing persons case, this one in West Virginia. 3 hikers vanished near a limestone cave system, their abandoned campsite found with all gear intact. The local sheriff quoted in the article mentioned unusual electromagnetic readings and equipment malfunctions during the search. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. I walked to the old filing cabinet in my spare bedroom and pulled out a manila folder marked Incidents Appalachian Region. 23 cases over the past 2 decades, all following the same pattern. People drawn to caves, equipment failures, searchers reporting psychological disturbances. Most got written off as accidents or voluntary disappearances. But I knew better. My hands shook as I added the newspaper clipping to the collection. The tremor had gotten worse lately, especially when I handled anything related to the sites. Dr. Martinez, the government psychiatrist who visited every 6 months, called it residual trauma response. I called it my early warning system. The phone rang. I let it go to the machine. Casey, it's Maria, just checking in. You missed Mom's birthday dinner again. I know you're dealing with stuff, but family matters too. Call me back. My sister's voice carried that careful tone people used around broken things. She thought I had regular PTSD, the kind that made sense. Combat stress, survivor's guilt, the usual demons that chewed up soldiers and spat them out. If only it were that simple. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the latest letter. No return address, postmarked from Montana. Inside, a photograph of a cave entrance carved into red rock, perfectly circular, with a single symbol scratched into the stone beside it. The same symbol that had been burned into my retinas for 20 years. Roger's handwriting on the back. The barriers are thinning. I should have burned it immediately like all the others. Instead, I found myself studying the symbol, tracing its curves with my finger. The pressure behind my eyes spiked, and for a moment I could see the cave as if I were standing there. Smell the metallic air, hear the whispers in languages that predated human speech. I dropped the photograph and stepped back, breathing hard. The kitchen walls looked wrong for a second, covered in flowing patterns that rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking directly. Then everything snapped back to normal. White paint, family photos, the ordinary life I'd built to keep the darkness at bay. My reflection in the window showed a man who'd aged badly. Gray streaked my hair, lines mapped the stress around my eyes, and the scar from Afghanistan had faded to a thin white line. But it was my hands that worried me most. Without thinking, I'd been drawing symbols on the condensation, the same geometric patterns that had driven William to suicide. I wiped the glass clean and walked to the gun safe in my bedroom closet. The Beretta M9 sat in its foam cutout, loaded and ready. I'd told myself for years it was for home defense, but we both knew better. Some nights when the whispers got too loud and the walls started moving, it felt like the only honest solution left. But not tonight. Tonight I had work to do. I spread a map of the United States across my kitchen table and marked the locations from my files with red pins. 23 incidents formed a rough pattern across the Appalachian Range, but 3 new clusters had emerged in the past 5 years. Montana, where Roger's latest letter originated. Northern California, where a geology team had vanished near Mount Shasta. And strangest of all, a series of disappearances in the Mojave Desert, nowhere near any mountains or caves. The pattern was expanding. Whatever we'd awakened at Site 12 wasn't contained to limestone cave systems anymore. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing, documenting everything I could remember about the original mission. Names, dates, equipment specifications, the exact sequence of events in the chamber. If something happened to me, someone needed to understand what they were dealing with. The government files would be sanitized, classified, useless. This might be the only honest record left. 3 hours later, my hand cramped from writing, and the legal pad was covered in detailed notes. I read through them once, then walked to the fireplace and struck a match. The pages caught quickly, curling into ash that drifted up the chimney. I couldn't risk leaving that information behind, not when I knew what people did when they learned too much about the sites. William had lasted 3 months. The university researcher Harold mentioned had managed 6 before hanging herself. I'd made it 20 years by keeping my mouth shut and my distance, but the knowledge was eating me alive from the inside. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The convergence accelerates. Join us willingly, or be consumed when the barriers fail. R. I deleted the message and turned off the phone. Roger, or whatever Roger had become, was getting bolder. The letters used to come every few months. Now it was weekly contact, each message more urgent than the last. I walked through my house, checking locks and security systems that wouldn't stop what was really hunting me. The motion sensors, cameras, and reinforced doors were theater, props in a play where I pretended normal threats were my biggest concern. In the bathroom mirror, I caught myself tracing symbols on my forearm with my fingernail. The scratches were shallow but precise, forming patterns that made my vision blur. I ran cold water over my arms and scrubbed until the marks disappeared. 20 years of this. 20 years of fighting the urge to return to Site 12, to seek out the other locations, to embrace the knowledge that pulsed behind my eyes like a migraine that never quite broke. Some days I wondered if William had been the smart one, choosing a quick exit over this slow dissolution. But then I'd get another missing persons report, another cluster of disappearances near a cave system, and I'd remember why I had to keep going. Someone needed to watch for the signs, to document the pattern, to serve as an early warning system for threats the government refused to acknowledge. I was humanity's unwitting sentinel, a broken soldier standing guard against horrors that shouldn't exist. It wasn't much of a life, but it was the only one I had left. I loaded fresh rounds into the Beretta's magazine and set it on my nightstand. Tomorrow I'd drive to the library and research the Montana disappearances, add them to my files, burn the evidence, and start the cycle again. Until the day the whispers became too loud to ignore, or the barriers between worlds finally collapsed, I'd keep my lonely watch. It was the least I could do for William, for Harold, for the 6 college kids who'd never made it home. And maybe, if I was very lucky, I'd find a way to stop what was coming before it consumed everything I'd spent 20 years trying to protect.